Good evening.
I can't hear you. I don't know if you're talking or not.
Okay, you there, right?
There we go. There we go. Good evening, Rabbi.
Okay, good evening. Okay, let's just make sure we're good. You're right, the volume was down. Okay. So I think we have one more here in this chapter. Daled. Okay. So it says here, yeah, we mentioned this already in the tour. You're not allowed to put a vessel with water under the candle to to absorb the sparks or the oil that drips out, whatever it is. So regarding this, says Bet Yosef, Mishnah Besod Per Kira. There's a Mishnah there in Mem Zayin Amud Bet, Gemara Mefaresh, and explains the Gemara, the Tama Mishum Shemikarev Zman Kibuy Anitzotzot. So he says the reason is because he brings closer the time to extinguish the sparks. Facilitates it. Ve'ita bebraita begemara. So it says in the Gemara there in Braita, Dafilu litno marav merev Shabbat, even to put it erev Shabbat, before Shabbat. So even that's forbidden. Wow. Mm-hmm. So this is more stringent than what we saw yesterday, which was talking about the vessel which was dripping into the candle. And then he says, yes, let's look in the Torah inside. It's better. There's probably some things here that we're going to see here. Some extra words. The full text. Okay, so it says here, I'll say the whole thing. Asur liten kli shel mayim tachat haner. You're not allowed to place a vessel full of water under the candle, afilu me'erev Shabbat, even erev Shabbat. Mipnei shehu mechaber. Why? Because this extinguishes. So what does that mean? That when the sparks fly out from the candle, it'll fall into the water and get extinguished faster than it would have been, without this vessel. But he says, nevertheless, right, you are allowed to light a lantern, even though you're putting water right on the bottom of the lantern. You can also put like an empty vessel under it, even on Shabbat, to catch the sparks and not foot that jump out. But you're not allowed to put it under it on Shabbat to absorb to catch the oil that drips out. As we said, right? We said that yesterday. You're nullifying the vessel from its usage by doing that. Why is that? Because it becomes a base and becomes muktzah. So he says right then, Erev Shabbat, you're allowed to put it under it in order to catch the to catch it with oil. And the thing is that you're not allowed to use that oil on Shabbat, for other purpose. Okay, that's the language of the Torah. The truth is that some of it probably we already read before. So let's go to Bet Yosef. So I'll read this again. It says, as we said, right, you're not allowed to put that vessel under the candle. So it says, Bet Yosef, Mishnah Basop Per Kira, right? It's a Mishnah, the Mem Zayin Mudbet. The Gemara, what does it say in Gemara? Mefarash the Tama Mishum, the Mekarev Zman Kibu, as we said, right, that the reason is because he's making it extinguish faster like that. Why? Because the water, right, makes it extinguish fast. It facilitates it. It says in the Braita there, so here, right, as we said, even Erev Shabbat, you're not allowed to do this. Right? So the question is, why can't you do it Erev Shabbat? What's the problem with that? Apparently, there's some kind of a decree there, right, that the rabbis made a little bit extra here. They went the extra mile with this decree a little bit. In other words, you would think that it should be allowed in this kind of scenario. But the rabbis told you, no, don't even do this. Don't even do it Erev Shabbat. Okay, let's see if we can find the answer for that. But before that, let's just read through it. Right? And then that which he wrote, that you're allowed to, as we said, right, to do this in the lantern. In a lantern, you're allowed to do this. So what does that mean? As we said, right, you're allowed to put water on the bottom of the lantern to catch those sparks, whatever. So the question is, right, what's the difference between the candle and the lantern? Why is one different than the other? The Ken Katvu Sham Tosfot, that's what Tosfot says there. The Tama Mishum Dechevan She'enu Mitkaven Lekiboy. So he says the reason why you're allowed to do it in a lantern is because since you're not intending to extinguish, right? That's not your intention. So what is your intention? Why are you putting water on the bottom? Because you want to raise up the oil to the top, right? That's the intention. So since don't have the intention, it's okay. So therefore, right, there's no reason to make any decree here since you don't have the intention. So let me elaborate on that, right, a little bit. So the thing is like this: when you don't have intention to do a certain labor, it already brings it down to a rabbinic prohibition, right? And then you don't really need to make another safeguard after that. That's what he's trying to say. You don't need two decrees, right? One decree on top of the other, as we said. So here also, that would be the same thing. But when it comes to the candle, right, they don't allow this, right, as opposed to the lantern, right? So why? Because there with the candle, the intention is actually to make it extinguished faster. Right? So you do have the intention there. That's the difference between one and the other. Okay, so that's that. And then he says, Katab Rabbi Yerucham, says the Rabbi Yerucham, Chelek Bet, B'Shem HaRama, name the Rama, Mutar Latet Mayim Od Yom B'Ner. You're allowed to put water, right, before Shabbat in the candle. Kichol Ma She'asa Me'erev Shabbat En Lo Mishum Gorem Kibui. So whatever you did before Shabbat, it's not really causing extinguishing. In other words, that's not the intention there, not the purpose. And yet he says, even though he wrote that whatever he's going to do Erev Shabbat, etc., really the anoten tam b'ashashit, the anoten mayim ashashit or b'ner kai. So it seems to me like he's talking about the case where he puts water into the lantern or the candle. Dafka zeush katav enbo mishum gorem kibui. That which he said, right, that there's no causage of extinguishing. The lo ave mikarev kibui doesn't facilitate the extinguishing. Ela gorem kibui, it causes it indirectly. Mishum hachi sharem erev Shabbat. So therefore, it's allowed to do this erev Shabbat. Afal pi shehu gorem kibui, even though it causes, right, indirectly extinguishing. Interesting. Since he didn't do this on Shabbat, rather he did it on Shabbat. And bo isur, there's no prohibition. But he says when you're facilitating the extinguishing, for instance, you put a vessel of water under the candle. Asur, that's forbidden. Even Erev Shabbat, because the Tanya be'edia b'Shabbat Gaonim, like it says in the Tshuva Gaonim, Katuv b'Shem Rab Netunai, it says the name of this rabbi, that Tama deshare leadlik b'shashit, fapisha noten mayim, b'mata mishum deshemen kulo dolek. So he says the reason why it's allowed to light in the lantern, even though he puts water under it, mishum deshemen kulo dolek, because that all that oil lights. And the water there does not facilitate, right, or cause extinguishing. Because it won't go out until the oil is used up. Then so he says it's not really made it doesn't really it doesn't extinguish, rather that which we learned, only this case, right? Where we said we don't put water under the candle, so there, it says when he does it, right, when he puts the water there, for sure the intention is to extinguish. Mutar liten kli taktav, and you're allowed to put a vessel under it. etc. Gam ze sham, it's also there. The Mishnah there, Uperesh bebraita, explains in the Braita that afilu b'Shabbat shara, even on Shabbat it's allowed. Uparich begemara, right, that objects in the Gemara. But you're right nullifying the vessel from its usage. So this rabbi answers, so he says, right, that sparks don't really have. How do you say this, right? They're not real. It's a literal translation, right? There's no reality there. So what does it mean by that? That it's not a real fire, sparks. You know why that is? So the reason is like this. I can give you a couple of reasons. One is that it has no fuel. Right? It's just like, a fleeting moment. It goes out, right? That's not really called a fire. Another thing is, right, which is related to that it goes out right away. It's like, so it has no fuel, goes out right away. So therefore, it's not really called a fire. So what does that mean? So he says, "En b'hem mamash, klomar mishum machi im naflu letocho mutar litlo mishekavu." So then, right, if they fell in there, you would be able to take it once it extinguished. In other words, as we said, right, it's very temporary, the sparks. So once it goes out, that's it, right? It's not really muktzah. You can use it. So therefore, there's not really any concern with sparks. So this is like a general theme, in the Talmud and Poskim, that sparks is not really a fire from the Torah. It's more like a rabbinical prohibition, but from the Torah, it's not called a fire. But there is a rabbinic prohibition. Just to, like connect this, into our world, our practical world, that, like fluorescent lights, for instance, right? They've been around since I was a kid. I remember. It's an old, creation, right? It's not really something very new. But nevertheless, right, the way they work, from what I was told, is that there's a starter in the fluorescent, right, lamp, whatever. There's a starter there, and there's a gas which ignites, So what happens is that the starter produces sparks, which ignites the gas. And that's why it glows. It's a particular gas that glows, right? I forgot the name of the gas. Anyway, the point is, right, that since there are sparks in the fluorescent, so there is a rabbinic prohibition, with fluorescent. Even though they may not be a Torah prohibition, but there is at least a rabbinic prohibition. There are some rabbis who, insist that it's also from the Torah, but I'm very hard pressed to understand what they're talking about. What can I tell you? Not really. It doesn't sound right. But just to explain, right, what they're saying is like this, right? That since those sparks make the gas glow, so that glowing gas is like a fire, The truth is, it's a very shabby theory. This theory doesn't really sound very good at all. I'm not going to get into it now. But anyway, right, for sure there is a rabbinic prohibition with fluorescent because of the sparks. because you want those sparks, right? It's not something that you don't intend. You do want them because that's what lights the gas, ignites the gas. As opposed to, like elevator, or air conditioner, there, the sparks, you don't want them, right? They're just a waste product. It's a byproduct. You don't want that stuff. So it's much different, right, than the fluorescent. Not really the same thing at all. But anyway, getting back to the history. I got you into reality a little bit, but back to history now. And so, because today we don't make these kinds of things, we don't really do this kind of stuff. But anyway, that's the thing, that sparks are not really, a fire from the Torah. Anyway, כתוב בקולבו, says in קולבו, שלתת כלי תחת הנר לקבל פחם. So it says, what about placing a vessel, right, under the candle to catch the pecham, right, which is like the burnt stuff, the ashes, whatever. Yeah, ashes. Which is on the top of the wick, right? The wick produces ashes a little bit, right? Even though our wicks don't produce so much, our wicks are very clean. But either way, yesh matrim, some allow, he says, they compare that to sparks. Just like sparks, don't really have a reality to them, they're just like, temporary and fleeting. Same thing with the ashes as well. That's what they say, They shall sing, but there are some who say not like that, right? They forbid. Because at least what we do have, right? We have one problem, which is you're, nullifying the vessel from its usage. Okay. Because they do have mamash. They do have some reality. So you know what he's saying over here? Right? Ashes, they do have some, right, the reality to them. In other words, they're real. It's not just some kind of a color, it's just it's something which, we call that, right, in science. It has mass. But that's how you really say it, Sparks don't have mass, they just disappear. But these ashes, they do have mass. I got the right word for it. I got lucky this time. Okay. So anyway, that's the story there. Let's move on. Yeah, okay, so this piece, we're done. Okay, so let's see Shulchan Aruch. So, says Shulchan Aruch, נותנים כלי תחת הנר לקבל ניצוצות מפני שאין בהם ממש. Look what he says, right? Just what we just concluded now. You are allowed to take a vessel, right, and put it under the candle to collect the sparks. Why? Because sparks have no mass. They're just a fleeting little, thing there. Super, very temporary. So therefore, there's no issue here of nullifying the vessel from its usage. We don't have that here. Because once a spark goes out, right, it's not muktzeh anymore. That's it, right? There's nothing left there. Okay, that's one thing. But he says, you know what? What you're not allowed to do is to put water in there, that vessel. Why? Because we said, right, what happens is, when he puts water in there, and the sparks fall in there, right, it makes them, get extinguished faster. It extinguishes faster, the sparks. So therefore, the rabbis forbade that. Right? As we said, Afilu be'od yom. Even during, before Shabbat, you're not allowed to do this. Really, there's a question like, why should this be forbidden before Shabbat? Because, it just goes automatically, right? Once you light it, it goes by itself. What do you care? So let's see Mishnah Berurah. Maybe he gives us something over here. We could use a little help. Let's see if we can get something. He right away jumps into my question here, this Mishnah Berurah. Right away jumps in. So, okay, we're on the same page over here with the Mishnah Berurah. So, okay, let's see what he answers, if he has an answer for this. Oh boy, a very interesting answer he gives over here. Oh boy. So he says, you know what? It's different over there that we allow, in general, right? We said before when we started, right, learning Shabbat, that if you start the labor before Shabbat, it just goes by itself. It's okay, right? We said that. So then, right, the question is, why can't we do it here? So answers the Mishnah Berurah that over there we allowed it because everybody knew, right, that there was a labor involved there, and they wouldn't touch it, on Shabbat. They wouldn't get involved with it. Everybody knows. But here he says, you know what? People may come to err and think that there is no labor here. So therefore, they may come to do it even on Shabbat. So therefore, he says, we're concerned. He's going to raise up that vessel, with the water, right next to the, close to the sparks, and he's going to actively extinguish them. Oh boy. Oh. Uh-huh. So where does he get this ingenious answer from? The Mishnah Berurah. So he says it comes from Tosfot. Oh. Right? And he says Tosfot also brings other answers for this. Wow, that's something. There's not only one answer, you have several answers there. Okay, that's one thing. And he says also it's brought down in Magen Avraham as well. This Tosfot, all these answers. There you go, right? So we're all set. What can I tell you? Got our money's worth with this Mishnah Berurah, that's for sure. There you go. Fantastic. They say, by the way, I heard from people that Mishnah Berurah is only on Orach Chaim, on one section of the Shulchan Aruch. And so it's like not such a big book, it's definitely substantial, but not the biggest book in the world. So question is, how long did it take for the Chafetz Chaim to write the Mishnah Berurah, which is 6 volumes basically. So they say, it took him, if I remember correctly, like 24 years to write the Mishnah Berurah. So, you would think, right? Why did it take so long? It's not really such a big book. So the answer is, right, you see from here, the answer is because he wrote it very slowly and meticulously. This is the reason why it took so long. And that's why it's a very useful book. That's the whole thing. A lot of thought went into it, you can see, right? It's a good piece of work. Okay, there you go. So we're done with this. With this chapter, we're done with everything. That's it. Let's see if the Mishnah Berurah, let's see, Shulchan Aruch, if we finished everything. There's a Ramah here. Okay, let's see the Ramah. There's still even more שולחן ערוך. מכל מקום מותר ליתן מים בעששית בערב שבת, כיוון שאינו מתכוון לחיבוי אלא להגביה שמן. So he says, on the other hand, right, you are allowed to put water under the flame, right, in your lantern. Because there you're not intending to extinguish anything. So why do you put the water there? To raise up the oil. As we know, right, oil rises to the top, so when you put water, automatically, right, the oil rises up. And this is what we want. We're not interested in extinguishing anything. There you go. That's the Shulchan Aruch. Now, here's the Ramah. Some say, he says, right, even if you do intend to extinguish, it's still allowed, he says, even if you do intend. So what is he talking about here? He's talking about the lantern, right? Even if you do intend, it's still allowed. Why? Because the water is not visible in the lantern, right? It's closed. So he says, since it's under the oil, right, it's not really direct extinguishing, it's like indirect causation. So he said, that's our custom. So Ramah seems to say right here that what? That when it comes to the lantern, right, there's also another good reason to allow it. Question is he also talking about the case with the candle or just the lantern? So let's see the Mishnah Berurah here. We got to see it. Okay, the Mishnah Berurah is talking about something else here. Let's see. Okay, I don't think I explained this. We have also here some other stuff. We have Biur Halacha, we have Magen Avraham, we have Taz. So let's take a look what they're saying here. Just give me a second if you don't mind. I have to get some water. There's some very interesting stuff going on here. So give me a second. Okay. So one thing I see here is that Magen Abraham argues with the Ramah here. And let me just see in the Taz what he says. So he's explaining the Ramah, what it means according to his understanding. So the way that Taz explains the Ramah, first of all, let me just read the Ramah again, right, one more time. Make sure we understand, just to remember what it says. So the Ramah says like this, right? Let me just read the whole Shulchan Aruch over. This way we'll get the whole picture. So it says Shulchan Aruch, "Maim afilu mibe'odion," right? Let me say. Notrim kli tachat haner, as we said, right? We place a vessel under the candle, the kabel nitzatzot, right, to absorb the sparks. So because they have no mass, and therefore you're not disqualifying the vessel from its usage. So that's fine, we're not even dealing with that. That's clear. But it says on the other hand, don't put water in there, even on Shabbat, right? Even before Shabbat, right? Even Erev Shabbat. Why? Because that extinguishes, it brings near, right? Facilitates the extinguishing of the sparks because it falls into the water, goes out right away. So now there's right away a question should pop up into your head when you read this, right? Why is this forbidden, right? As we already asked. After all, this is just grama, it's indirect causation, right? Because, yeah, okay, the sparks will fly, but that's going to be sometime later down the road. Right now, there's no sparks, nothing. So why are we worried about something eventuality, which is going to happen later on? That's a that's the first question you have to ask when you read this. Okay, let's hold on to that. So then, so that you're not allowed to do. But then we said, right, that if you're doing a lantern, it's okay. Why? Because there your intention is not to put the fire out. Your intention is to raise up the oil higher, so you can have a higher flame. There are some ladies who do this, by the way. When they light Shabbat candles, what they do is, they the bottom they fill up with water, and then on top there's oil, so the oil is higher, just to make it look nicer or whatever, to be more useful. But so that's with the lantern, right? Your intention is not to put it out. Your intention is to raise it up. That's why the ladies do it, because their intention is not to put it out. Their intention is to raise it up. So therefore, as we're saying over here, it's allowed to do that. So we already said, right? Mishnah Berurah explained that the reason why we're concerned here, even though in general we're not concerned about things like this, when you start something and it goes by itself on Shabbat, why are we concerned about this? Because says Mishnah Berurah, because here, people don't really realize, that something is forbidden there. It's not such a clear form of labor. It's not so clear. So people don't realize, there's a problem. So they may come to transgress. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says to explain this thing. But, right, okay, so until there, we're all good, We still have one question, right, which is, but it's only indirect causation, so then why should it be forbidden? Right, to do this. Usually indirect causation, we say it's allowed. So what's the problem over here? Grammar, right? Grammar. Okay, so that's one question that looms over us here. And then, right, we get into the Ramah. So says the Ramah, V'yesh omrim, right? Some say, even if his intention is to actually do, right, to extinguish it. So you know what the Taz says, right? He explains this. He says what it means is that his intention is like this, right? He's putting in water into the lantern, right? So as we said, right, you're raising up the oil to the top. But his intention is like this, once the oil runs out, right, and the flame gets to the water, it'll go out by itself, right? So in other words, you are intending to extinguish it sometime down the road. So it says Ramah, even if that's your intention. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about the lantern, right? The lantern. If that's your intention to do with a lantern like that, then it should go out later on. It's allowed, according to this opinion. Why? Because the water is not visible, right? It's on the bottom. It's under the oil, right? So, and it's indirect causation, as we said, right? So therefore, right, according to this opinion, samag, right, this is indirect causation, and therefore it's allowed. Right? Even if it was your intention, still grandma is allowed. Okay, it's pretty heavy duty stuff here, but this is very important concepts of Shabbat. You see, from here, you're not only learning this halacha, you're also learning the concepts, how you paskin for Shabbat. So it's a very important halacha here to understand. Even though, we don't do this kind of stuff. We don't really, but we do, actually, right, as we said, right, some ladies, they like to put water under the oil in a candle, right? That's something which is fairly common for some ladies to raise it up higher, whatever, right? And also to go out. So says the Ramah, right? Since it's only indirect causation, so then, right, even if your intention is to put it out, it's okay. So he said that's a custom, to be lenient with this. So, right, just to understand, right, what are we saying here? The Shulchan Aruch says the reason why it's allowed to use the lantern is because your intention is not to extinguish. Comes the Ramah and says even if it is to extinguish your intention, it's still allowed according to this opinion, right? This other opinion here. Because it's indirect causation, grammar. Okay, fine. So that's that. Now, let me just look one more time, right, at the commentary here. Mishnah Brura, one more time. So here comes the Magen Avraham, right? And he answers this question. Interesting, right? So again, right, to reiterate, what is the question? The question is, right, as we said, if it's grama, if it's indirect causation, then why is it forbidden? Why it should be okay? Like the second opinion, we saw in the Ramah. That's the question. So he comes and answers this. So he says the reason is because שכיוון שהמים בעין בוודאי יפלו הניצוצות בכוונה כיבוי, הוא נותן להם, הרי אלו כמכבה בידיים, אבל אלו צלוחית שנותנים. Oh, so he says like this, right? Interesting. Wow. Since the water is visible, and for sure, right, it's going to fall in there, right? The sparks. And therefore his intention is to extinguish. So it's considered to be like that he's doing it actively, not indirect causation. In other words, this case is so acute, in terms of its right, the intention is super clear, of what he wants to do. So since it's so acutely clear what his intention is, so it says Magen Avraham, it's like you're doing it actively, not indirect causation, as if. So therefore, the rabbis here, right, decreed not to do this. Okay, I'm not gonna rack your brains too much. I guess we'll stop here. If there's something to add, to this, we'll continue tomorrow. B'ezras Hashem, if we have a couple of extra words to say. Otherwise, we'll go to the next chapter. Okay, thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Chazak u'baruch, Leila Tov, and we'll see you tomorrow. B'ezras Hashem.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
God bless.